Hello, happy Monday night here on the Wolverine live here on the Wolverine.com YouTube channel and in the Wolverines YouTube feed. That's double saying it. Podcast feed is what I meant to say. I'm a little flustered today because it's finally here. The start of Michigan football's fall camp is upon us as of Tuesday. Clayton and I, Clayton Safey, Anthony Broom, here with you tonight. We'll run through some of the top storylines for fall camp, get you guys up to speed, weigh in on some of those position battles. We'll go offense, defense, a lot to get to in tonight's show. We will talk about our couple ad reads due in the show as well. We'll do that momentarily, but first I welcome in my co-host for the evening, Clayton Safey. Sir, it is time. Fall camp has begun. We were at Big Ten Media Days as we recapped last week on Friday. We still have our weekends about us, but now that we're kind of in it, so to speak, how you feeling about everything?
Yeah, I have about a month to maybe figure out the rest of my golf game, and then it's basically over. Jim Harbaugh had his golf outing today. Proceeds go to NIL Collective Champions Circle. Heard he made a 55-foot putt, excuse me. And it seemed like people had a pretty good time over there. So they're finishing up their golf for the summer. Practice on Thursday, first one of the year. So we are getting there, but super excited and can't wait to hear more about this team as it is forged during fall camp, as Jim Harbaugh says. This is when you forge the team, and that's when they kind of build their identity, figure out what they're going to do. Guys are healthier now compared to spring, so they're about to be in it here.
Absolutely. We'll go through offense, defense. We'll weigh in on those position battles. Like I said before, a lot to get to. But we do have some housekeeping to do as we clean up the month of July. So you'll hear a couple ad reads from our great sponsors in this show. And we'll start out with this one in our friends over at Caldera. Folks, first impressions matter. There are no two ways around it. The first time you probably jumped on a video and saw Clayton and I doing a podcast, you probably jumped to some kind of conclusion about it. Of course, we're both glowing, as always, glowing with optimism about the start of fall camp. But, what's the first thing that someone notices about you when you make that first impression? In a lot of cases, it's your face, and most importantly, your skin. If you aren't already, it's time to put your best face forward. How do you do that? By adding a skincare routine, and that is where our friends over at Caldera Lab come in. Clinically proven to reduce wrinkles, fine lines, and sign of aging. Caldera Lab is the leader in men's skincare and here to save the day. Use our exclusive code MICH23 at calderalab.com to enjoy 20% off their best products. Caldera Lab creates high-performance men's skincare products, and the regimen leads off their product lineup to twice-a-day routine to transform your skin. You've got the clean slate, the base layer, and the good. The clean slate starts and ends your day. Face wash leaves all skin types refreshed. The base layer is your daily moisturizer that hydrates your skin and absorbs it fast, leaving you with a matte finish so you can start your day confidently. And the good is your go-to at night before bed and a clinically proven multifunctional serum that helps your skin look tighter and smoother, as well as help reduce the visibility of wrinkles and fine lines. In every drop of their serum, there are 3.4 million antioxidant units protecting your skin. That means, I don't really know what that means, but it's a lot of science language being thrown my way, and it must mean good things. So, again, use promo code 20% off with our code MICH23. That's MICH23 at calderalab.com. 20% off at calderalab.com. Use that promo code MICH23. All right, Clayton, let's get into it. I want to start on the offensive side of the ball. And, with so much to kind of sift through heading into this fall camp, and a lot of things are known, some things are unknown. We'll get into all that, but I think the best way to do this is to go position by position. So we'll start with the quarterbacks here. Obviously, we know at the top of the depth chart who's going to lead the way from Michigan. It's going to be J.J. McCarthy, entering his third season with the program. A lot of hype around, how he played last season, but also how he ended last season. Despite kind of ending that year on a sour note in the loss to TCU, we saw a lot from him down the stretch when they needed him the most when Blake Corum was not out there. So J.J. McCarthy, not a whole lot of controversy with this. He's going to get all of the QB1 reps. Maybe some of those other guys mix in if JJ needs a maintenance day or something like that. But JJ McCarthy is the starting quarterback. And I think to me, the most interesting, because we spent all offseason talking about the starting quarterback and JJ being the guy and the first round NFL draft type. For me, I kind of want to hone in on this backup job because at any point in a season, and again, we sit here knocking on wood, your quarterback could miss a series, could miss, a half, could miss a game. So often throughout a championship caliber season, your depth is tested somewhere. And Michigan was very fortunate that really, for the most part, the last 2 seasons, that hasn't been the case. So that kind of puts a spotlight on this backup quarterback job. Jack Tuttle, Davis Warren, Alex Orji, I would also throw in that mix. As we kind of round into fall camp, knowing what we do about this quarterback position, what are your thoughts on the state of this room? I think as long as QB1 stays healthy, they're going to be fine. I think there are steps forward that will naturally be taken just with more game reps. But, the cloud, and it's not necessarily a dark cloud, but kind of the elephant in the room is what happens in the doomsday scenario where JJ maybe goes down.
Yeah, and look around college football even last season and really every year, there were pretty significant injuries at quarterback for some of the top teams. Tennessee comes to mind, several others that lost their quarterback, whether that was for a couple weeks or the rest of the season. So that's going to be really important. But for me, looking at the quarterback room, it is that guy, JJ McCarthy. How much better has he gotten throughout the offseason? Jim Harbaugh's talked about this a lot, but quarterback is essentially the position that you can most improve throughout an offseason. You don't really need anybody else with you. It helps to have guys running routes and catching balls for you, but you can improve just by yourself. It's kind of like kicker in that way. So, and obviously he's been working with his guys offensively to get better. But how much better is he a first rounder like some of these mock drafts came out with earlier this spring after the last NFL draft, or is he just going to be a very good college football quarterback this fall? I think we know that at the bare minimum, it's going to be, he's going to be a very good college football quarterback this fall. But, just what kind of step has he taken? How has he learned, in the mental side of the game as well, making decisions, which I thought really improved throughout the end of last season or throughout the season and into the end of the season. But he still had a ways to go, as we saw in the Fiesta Bowl. So to me, it's JJ McCarthy and what he's going to be, because if he is what people think he could be on the NFL side and be a guy that we're talking about as a potential first rounder next spring, then the sky is truly the limit for this offense. Yeah, you don't have maybe a first round receiver, but if he elevates his game to that level, I don't think you necessarily need one. And, I was reading Bruce Feldman's article today over on The Athletic, and, he talked about the teams that have won the national championship over the last 10, 15 years that have been in the same range of, recruiting rankings as Michigan have had that quarterback that, like a Cam Newton, and, no one's going to expect that. He might be the best player of all time in college. But Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson, again, he doesn't have to be that, but close to that range, then you're looking at a team that could win the national title. So I'm looking at JJ McCarthy, how much better he's going to become early on in the season. And, of course, he'll improve throughout the year as well.
Yeah, I have very little doubts that he I talked about this in a radio hit I did last week where, he checks all the boxes from a skill set standpoint. I mean, I think for the most part, he makes pretty good decisions. I think he's fairly accurate with the ball. And again, a lot of maybe the deep balls that he's floated or those throws, maybe the gotta have it throws over the middle of the field. I think that just comes with repetition and enhanced mechanics. And, he checks the boxes from that perspective, from a passing perspective. I think there's actually more, and I don't know that Michigan's really going to explore this a ton, but I think there's more that he can do with his legs. I think he's proven more than capable of that. So you've got a little bit of that dual, not a little bit of it. You've got a lot of that dual threat skill set in what he brings to the table. Then also, I think upstairs, the mental game. I think he's, not super surprised that he's a resilient guy, or what does Jim Harbaugh say? Gravel in the gut. This guy's a former hockey player. He can take hits. We've actually seen him deliver hits down the field. As your quarterback, the Big Ten championship one from 2 years ago stands out when he gets down the field on that long run to make a block. To me, just ticks all the boxes. So for me, again, you want to see him put up as gaudy numbers as he can within the confines of this offense. I don't know that it's going to look like what some of those names you listed off were, but If he's what he's being hyped to be from an NFL perspective, I don't think it's crazy to think that Michigan can expect that out of him if they put that on his shoulders. So, I want to move because we said we were going to mix in kind of position battle predictions in here as well. For me, like I said, there's no question at the top of the depth chart who's your guy there. For me, it's the backup job. So I think right now, I think I can pretty safely say before camp starts that you're probably looking at Davis Warren there. But so I'm going to kind of plant my flag there for now. But your thoughts on who might win that backup job and who we should be keeping an eye on?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say Jack Tuttle, just with the experience there, but I think it's going to go through fall camp into the season. We saw that kind of happen last year. It was like, I think 1 week Alan Bowman might have traveled to one of those road games, and then the next week it was Davis Warren, and it seemed like Davis Warren edged out Alan Bowman, by the end of the year. But I think Jack Tuttle, he started 5 games in the Big Ten, has a little bit more experience, but it could be situational. If you need a guy to start a game, it might be Jack Tuttle. But if you need a guy to come in for, a few plays, it might be Alex Orji. If you need a couple quarters, it might be Davis Warren in a certain game. So it's just going to depend potentially on situation. But I'm going to go with Jack Tuttle, at least to start fall camp. Are we predicting what it'll end up being or where we think it's at?
Your flag. I mean, let's season opener, September 2nd. Who's that guy?
I'll say second quarterback in is Jack Tuttle.
Okay. So I'm on the board for Davis Warren. Clayton is on the board for Jack Tuttle. Let's move to those running backs. Again, not a lot to talk about here outside of, what is the breakdown going to look like between Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. And Michael Barnett has a question in the chat where he asked, will Donovan and Blake be utilized on the field at the same time more often? And I think we're going to see some of that, especially given that Donovan Edwards has proven to be a guy who's, essentially a slot receiver, a big, thick slot receiver that's kind of still learning how to play running back. So, yeah, I think there's going to be times where you see that. Again, what does the workload look like? I said it a couple of weeks ago. Jim Harbaugh has often talked about how, an emphasis for them or what he would like to see throughout the span of the season is that they break down the film on Sunday and chart who got the ball. And, he would like the touches to be a healthy amount for just about everyone. But I do think at the end of the day, managing that type of workload within this offense is going to come down to the touches that Blake Corum gets and Donovan Edwards get, because, as good as JJ McCarthy is, I think those two guys are the engine that kind of controls what the ultimate ceiling of this offense looks like. So, I mean, people ask also, which one of them is going to be, has a better chance to be Michigan football's Heisman Trophy candidate. And truth of the matter is, between McCarthy and both of these guys in the backfield, it really just kind of depends on what the numbers look like. But I certainly think all three are capable.
Yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of storylines with the running back room. This might be the best running back room in the entire country, and it's going to be extremely dangerous. It's going to be really fun to watch. And these guys are both healthy now. They weren't in the spring. So now I think is the time where they can tinker a little bit with what Michael Barnett, a fantastic viewer that we have, a great guy, is talking about with these guys on the field together, whether it's, platooning. Jim Harbaugh, very interestingly, last week said that he thinks Donovan should probably get the same amount of touches as Blake. Again, we say it, there's the caveat where once the season starts, they're going to do what it takes to win. And that may be leaning on Blake a little bit heavier, but both of these guys need to get the ball. They both need to eat, as Harbaugh said last month. And I agree. So I think that they're going to be able to figure out this month what their plan is going to be going into the season with these two. And then plans also change throughout the year, whether one guy's banged up, whether one guy has the hot hand. I mean, remember 2 years ago in 2021, Blake and Hassan Haskins were essentially splitting carries, throughout the beginning portion of the season. They each had their role, but then Blake, kind of suffered his ankle sprain. Hassan just became an absolute workhorse, even more than he already was. And, he ended up kind of being the guy there towards the end of the year. But plans are going to change. But at the same time, this is a crucial month for them figuring out what they're going to do with both of these guys. And the possibilities are really, really exciting.
I think the bigger question with this group, because, again, assuming both those guys are healthy, they're known commodities. We've seen what they can both do on the field together for, parts of last year, parts of the 2021 season. To me, it's that third running back because Jim Harbaugh keeps saying there will be a third guy that emerges to take on that role. And there's a litany of options. Last year, you're kind of scratching your head on who that guy might wind up being, and it wound up being CJ Stokes. But now you've got CJ Stokes back for his sophomore year. You've got freshman in Benjamin Hall, who was, arguably the star of the spring game, just in terms of a guy kind of coming out of nowhere and showing what he can do. You've got Cole Cabana in there. You've got Tavier Dunlap. Kalel Mullings, I would assume, is still kind of in that mix as well. So for me, it's hard to even. I think that's another thing where it's going to be one of those battles that goes into the regular season. I don't even know if I'd even call it a battle. It might just be who has the best week of practice and who could, puts the most consecutive strong days together. It's hard to plant a flag in that one. Right now, I would say Stokes. He's got a little chip on his shoulder. He's got the experience. Needs to shore up some of the ball security stuff. But for me, in the here and now, I'd tap the brakes on the freshman a little bit. Tavier Dunlap, again, I mean, if he's ever going to make an impact on this team, it's going to have to come, he's going to have to show it in this, which would be his third camp. But for me, I think Stokes there is probably that guy.
I think each of these guys are going to get a decent amount of carries in those first 3 games, and it could be determined there. I mean, I think CJ Stokes probably coming into the year last season, they didn't really realize what they had probably until he started to shine in some garbage time at the end of those games. So I think that's going to be really important, valuable time for this group. I would say probably CJ Stokes as well coming into fall camp. But I just have this feeling, and I know I said this a couple months ago as well, that out of that group, maybe minus CJ Stokes, but maybe even, include him in here, Cole Cabana, there's just something about his game that he just adds that element of speed. They can use him like Donovan Edwards as well out of the slot. He was telling me when we were in Cleveland that they used him in a lot of empty stuff in the spring before he got hurt. So I just feel like he could carve out a role that's not necessarily, he's not maybe your third running back on the depth chart, but he actually plays more meaningful snaps than some of these other guys just because he has a unique skill set. So that's something I'm going to watch, but a lot of that will probably be determined in those first 3 games, and there's nothing better than live reps. Harbaugh said just last week that, practice predicts game performance, but nothing predicts game performance like game performance. And luckily for Michigan, they have some late opponents early on, so we'll be able to see what these guys are doing in, against live defenses and things like that.
And not that momentum year to year is always a thing, but we assume that this backfield is going to be cleared out next year. I mean, I would think that if everything goes according to plan, obviously Blake Corum winds up in the NFL, Donovan Edwards winds up in the NFL. So these guys aren't just fighting it out for, position behind those 2 guys in the depth chart. They're kind of staking their claim to, what these position battles look like in the spring and fall games next year too. So really interested in seeing how that shakes out, because we know, I mean, the run game has been the engine of this football team, at least from the offensive perspective, over the last 2 years. So a lot to sort through when it comes to that. But let's move to pass catchers now. I'll kind of just throw wide receivers and tight ends in the same hat. I think the top of this depth chart probably looks relatively set. I mean, you've got Cornelius Johnson, Roman Wilson at the top. I would assume that Tyler Morris is probably your slot guy in the here and now, and then you'll see Darius Clemens and maybe a few of those other guys mix in. At tight end, it's Colston Loveland and AJ Barner. I think those are the 2 clear guys right now there. But there's so much that's been talked about in terms of JJ McCarthy and what his stat line might look like. Does this team throw the ball more? When you look at the top of this depth chart, Clayton, at both of these positions, do you feel like they have, because I think people took for granted too, as good as Colston Loveland is, Eric All and Luke Schoonmaker, when healthy, those guys were really good in this offense. If they're going to, put a little more on JJ's plate, do you like this stable of playmakers that they have?
Yeah, I like it. Maybe I don't necessarily love it compared to some of the other teams out there nationally, especially the ones that are competing for a national championship. But I think it's going to be pretty solid. And it's that combination, right? As you kind of talked about. I mean, it's the tight ends, it's the wide receivers, it's the running backs that can catch the football. It's JJ's legs on passing downs as well. He can get them out of a bind if he needs to. It's the offensive line protecting for him. So they have a leg up in a lot of different areas that'll help elevate the wide receivers, help elevate the tight ends. I'm excited to see what Colston Loveland, what kind of leap he took. I think expectations are a little, maybe a tad bit too high for him at this point. Some people expect him to be All-American, that sort of thing. But I think he's going to be really good, and I think he's going to improve as a blocker. And then I think you kind of know where I'm going with this too. I think Roman Wilson is going to take a big step forward and emerge. But during fall camp, I think this is going to be where J.J. McCarthy finds his favorite targets. Last year, it was no secret. It was Ronnie Bell and Luke Schoonmaker. Donovan Edwards, when he was healthy, was pretty big as well, with him and obviously a few other guys. But this is where they're going to figure out the chemistry. And this is kind of with JJ taking all those first team reps, as you mentioned earlier on in the show, this is where that chemistry is going to pay off. And they're going to be ahead of the curve where they were last season when it was kind of mid-year. And it was like, yeah, we're still trying to rep that deep ball. We're still trying to rep some downfield passes. And obviously you're going to do that, but they were trying to figure it out a little bit more because JJ was hurt earlier on that offseason, because JJ had to beat out Cade and they were splitting first team reps. So that's an important element with the pass catching group, I think, too.
Yeah, and I look at, I hone in on wide receiver here because I look at the group of tight ends, and I know they lost maybe the top 4 guys from the depth chart or 5 guys from that room, whatever it wound up being from last year. And, there's really not a lot of concern there for me because I like what Colston Loveland is. I think that the fact that some people are talking about him like he's, he could be Brock Bowers, I think that's probably a bit much. Not saying anyone's making that direct comparison, but there's a lot of expectations.
Brock Bowers should be in the Heisman conversation. He absolutely
that dude's
should.
A freak.
Yeah. That's a little lofty, I would say, as a comparison.
I'm just saying there's a lot of, I won't even call it hyperbole yet, but it's just there's a lot of praise being thrown his way. And
no, I agree.
That's that sophomore leap. I'm not going to say it'll be telling. I think he's going to be pretty good. I wouldn't be surprised if he winds up being the best tight end in the Big Ten, but I don't worry. I think AJ Barner is more than capable. I think that he can kind of fill into that Schoonmaker role. I think Matthew Hibner has been kind of waiting his turn this is his senior year now, but we saw him a little bit in the spring, and he's a guy that looks like he has a little more juice to his game than we thought he might have had. So, Max Bredesen, I think, he's going to play a little more of that H-back type role this year, but, he's one of those lunch pail guys, he's going to do the dirty work, especially in the run game. So the tight end room, I feel pretty good about. For me, the question is the sophomores, right? Like that's kind of the elephant in the room with that position group is Darius Clemens. A lot of hype last year, but again, true freshman. It's really hard to play wide receiver at this level. Even when Michigan recruited a couple 5-star guys, a couple years ago, it took those guys a couple years to learn how to run routes. And if you want to get the ball and if you want to touch the field at this program and in this offense, you got to be able to block too. And whether you're physically up for the challenge or not, it's tough for a true freshman to come in and kind of crack the lineup. So we'll see what happens with Clemens. I kind of feel like 2024 is maybe more when we see him a little more fully unleashed, sliding into the role that Cornelius Johnson maybe winds up leaving behind. But Tyler Morris, I think, is a fairly safe bet to be productive. I think he's going to be a really solid slot receiver. We'll see which of those freshmen are able to crack the lineup. But to me, again, these are two position groups where I don't think the depth chart, there's just perpetual competition when you have, 2 or 3 of these guys from the same group that can be on the field at the same time. But not overly concerned, but also a lot of question marks here too. We'll see what winds up happening.
Yeah. And it's also worth noting too, when you talk about Tyler Morris and especially Darius Clemens, like progression is not always linear. I mean, the light could come on for one of these guys this month or, August in the next month, and they end up being a featured guy. I mean, a lot happens in fall camp. They're on the field a lot. They're in meetings a lot. And guys improve by practicing. So you could see Darius Clemens come out of fall camp, starting game 1 or something like that. You could see Tyler Morris become one of J.J. McCarthy's favorite targets again after he was in high school when they were both at Nazareth Academy in LaGrange Park. So that, and it reminds me too of last year when it was J.J. who it was kind of neck and neck with Cade basically all of camp. And it was the last 4 or 5 practices, Jim Harbaugh said, that he was just absolutely on fire. He dominated the last scrimmage. And then we saw what he did in the first 2 games against Colorado State and Hawaii. So that's one example, but you're going to see guys break out during fall camp, and wide receiver is kind of that spot. I think most Michigan fans are hoping we see that with Tyler Morris, Darius Clemens, because there's a lot of potential with those 2 guys. and there's room for a guy behind Cornelius and Roman Wilson to step up. So definitely be watching that for sure. And AJ Barner is overlooked at tight end. I should have mentioned him as well.
I would agree with that. And I would say this too. I mean, I think that as stable, like Cornelius Johnson, Roman Wilson at the top, I think it's about as stable as it can get. But I don't know that either of those guys are, and maybe the light flips on and you know, the production takes a big step forward. But, you know, I don't know that those guys are going to be as, I'll say this. This is the better way to phrase it. I don't know if they're locked in for now, but I think there's a lot of wiggle room for these other guys to move up if they have a big fall camp. So we'll see what happens there. I also think just a last note on this. I think that this group of wide receivers and tight ends, I think sometimes the fact that Ohio State does recruit the way it does at wide receiver kind of overshadows. I mean, again, that's a pretty high bar to set. And you want to see Michigan develop some more of these guys. I mean, they haven't had a first round receiver taken since I think it was Braylon Edwards in 2005 at this point. So you'd love to see some of those guys pop through. I think player development needs to be a little bit better there, but also I think at times, we rack our brains a little too hard when when the school south of the state line is recruiting at the insane level that they are. But anywho, let's move on to the offensive line. This is the group that, I talked about how the run game has kind of been the engine of this offense over the last 2 years. If they're the engine, I mean, the offensive line is the snowplow attached to the front, right? Like they're the guys that are opening holes. Those are the guys that are giving these guys opportunities to make the plays that they are in the run game. Little more wide open this year heading into camp. We know that Zach Zinter, Trevor Keegan, as long as those guys stay healthy at guards, those are your starting guards. But everywhere else, I mean, the preseason magazine, I'm pretty sure the depth chart that we put out, we had Ladarius Henderson at left tackle. We had the two guards locked into where they were. We had Drake Nugent at center and then Carson Barnhart at right tackle. But Jim Harbaugh thinks that they have at least 10 guys that can start there. And, I think the biggest storyline with the offensive line is that pretty much both tackle spots and starting center, despite, a lot of the buzz we've heard about Drake Nugent, all of that's up for grabs right now. And we think we know who leads there, but this is probably the most fluid the offensive line has been since, at least the COVID season and maybe a little further back than that. Because even then, those lineups were affected by injuries and things like that. There's a little more up in the air this time around.
Yeah, Jim Harbaugh has perfected having about 100 scholarship players on this team somehow. I don't know how he's doing it. And about 40 starters. He'll label about 40 guys starters when that's not actually possible because there is a definition to the word starter. You actually start the game. But he's got a deep team. He loves the talent he has. An offensive line, probably no deeper position group, right, on this team than offensive line. And I agree. I mean, there are probably 10 guys that you would feel pretty comfortable with starting. But, yeah, I mean, this is basically, to me, what I'm going to be watching the most on offense throughout fall camp is the offensive line depth chart. Left tackle. I mean, I think Carson Barnhart probably deserves to be number one on the depth chart at this point, and Ladarius Henderson's going to have to earn it. Now, I think he will. I think Ladarius Henderson will end up being your left tackle. I think Drake Nugent will edge out Greg Crippen at center, and I think you'll probably move Carson Barnhart back over to right tackle after he played on the left side in the spring. So that would be my prediction, but it has to play out. We saw Trente Jones win the right tackle job last fall camp and then, only gave it up when he went down with a high ankle sprain at Indiana. So there's going to be competition here. Iron is going to sharpen iron, and, it's going to make everybody better up front. And you know what else is going to make everybody better up front is having two potentially All-American guards. I mean, Trevor Keegan is as good as they come, and Zach Zinter is maybe even better, and could be a first or second round pick next year. So those guys are going to help the center. Those guys are going to help the right tackle. Those guys are going to help the left tackle. And they're all going to elevate each other's game. So, yeah, there is a deep offensive line room with a guy in Giovanni El Hadi that, for example, at, the guard spot probably won't start until he's a senior, even though he showed so much promise earlier on in his career. And that's basically the best example I have to show, just how deep this offensive line room is.
Well, and as we saw last year too, like they're probably going to need him at some point because Trevor Keegan, as good as he is when he's on the field, has had problems staying healthy. Zach Sinter has been banged up at times. Both Trente Jones and Carson Barnhart were injured at points last season. And Ladarius Henderson, I mean, he's been around, but he hasn't been on the field with this team yet. So there is a lot of opportunity. Like I said, I think what Harbaugh says about having as many as 10 guys that can start, I think what he's really saying is that he has as many as 10 guys that would probably start at most other schools. I think that, from a Michigan perspective, again, it's about finding your best 5. I think we know who 2 of those 5 are. And honestly, with Nugent in there, we probably know who 3 of their best 5 are.
Yeah.
If you want to throw Carson Barnhart in there as well. So really, it's just kind of finding who that last guy is. Feld for Life asks, odds that Miles Hinnon wins the right tackle job. That guy is massive. And if he's healthy and he kind of finds that mean streak and is able to put it all together, I wouldn't doubt him winning one of these jobs that are up for grabs, probably at right tackle. But there's kind of a lot to sort out here. And, for all this talk about, this is why I think a couple weeks ago when we came on here and someone had asked about, the odds that they go 3 for 3 with the Joe Moore Award. I think it's probably not going to be until later on this year, maybe halfway through, where this group, maybe hits its stride and becomes what they ultimately need it to be, which is the best it can be in December and January, when it hasn't really been the case the last 2 years.
It's a great point, though, by Feld for Life. A great question, because Miles Hinton, to me, I wrote an article with however many wild cards, the top 7 wild cards on this team. Miles Hinton is a wild card. I mean, this is a dude that said that midway through last season at Stanford, he fell in love with football. He was playing, he was in his 3rd season as a college football player, and he didn't really love it. He's a great student, extremely smart kid, just like Chris was, his brother, who played at Michigan, just like his dad, who played in the NFL. And he thought of himself more as a student, even though he's 6'7" and 300 whatever pounds, which is just crazy to think about. But he said the light turned on, and he felt like he wanted to go somewhere after last season where he would be challenged more. That's why he's welcoming the competition that Michigan has at tackle right now. So he's a guy that it would not shock me at all to see number 78 out there starting at right tackle, even left tackle when the season begins. I wouldn't peg him there now, but he is definitely one of those guys with some upward mobility on the depth chart. So he's one of the most interesting guys, I think, on this entire team, and could be, when it's all said and done, one of the better pickups that Michigan made in the transfer portal this offseason, because he'll probably be here for, a couple more seasons.
Well, let's sort this out really quick. Who is this starting 5? I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I would have, just based on what we know, Henderson, this is from left to right, Henderson, Zinter, Henderson, Keegan, Nugent, Zinter, and Barnhart. To me, I think right now, I won't say it feels clear, but I think that's the most likely outcome. But any changes there?
No, that's what I would have as well.
Okay, well, we will switch over to the defensive side of the ball here in a minute, but continuing our housekeeping here on the Wolverine Live, I want to talk about our friends over at Bird Dogs. As you can see, if you're watching the video, got my Bird Dogs polo on this evening. It is so comfortable. I mean, it's tailor-made for you golfers out there. Clayton, that especially applies to you. The Bird Dogs make you look good. The stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Bird Dogs shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but fit way better. They fit way better than regular shorts that are made of stiff, restricting cotton. Bird Dog fixed this issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki but stretches, so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. Bird Dogs also uses the anti-stink, sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. Like I said, they sent me a polo shirt. I'm no exaggeration, maybe the most comfortable polo shirt I have. So excited to get out there with my polo shirt, also a tech hat that they sent along, and the Bird Dog shorts. I mean, they've been great so far. Super comfortable stuff. 5-star review as far as I'm concerned. Head on over to birddogs.com/Wolverine or enter promo code Wolverine for the free tech hat. Like I mentioned before, that's birddogs.com/Wolverine or promo code Wolverine for the tech hat. You won't want to take off any of the stuff they send you. I promise you that. So check out our friends over at Bird Dogs today. Tonight, we are also sponsored by our friend Andy Luedecke over at My Perfect Franchise. And are you a displaced corporate executive or wanting to put your career in your own hands? Or are you experienced entrepreneur wanting to diversity? Well, Andy Luedecke can help. Andy is a huge college sports fan and a franchise veteran, having owned multiple franchises and businesses. Using his expertise, he helps others find their American dream through a very thorough consultation and evaluation process. Call Andy, put your life and career in your own hands. Best of all, Andy's a wonderful guy. We've had the chance to meet with him a few times. His services are 100% free to you. So what do you have to lose? There's nothing. So if you're interested in any of that, be sure to head on over to myperfectfranchise.net. You can also contact Andy at 404-973-9901. Again, that's myperfectfranchise.net. So thank you to our wonderful sponsors who make the machine move here on a Monday night. Clayton, I want to move now over to the defensive side of the ball. Again, it looks like we are headed towards another year where this is Jim Harbaugh's no-star defense. We'll start in the trenches, as everything does with the Michigan Wolverines. And I guess we can loop the tackles and the edge guys into the same mix here. But to me, I think that the most interesting conversation about this defensive line is at that edge rusher position. You know, you lose a couple guys from last year. Taylor Upshaw transferred out. Mike Morris is in the NFL now. Yabioki transferred as well to play for Biff Poggi at Charlotte. So you kind of have, I think there are four guys at the top. It's pretty clear that there are four. It's Braden McGregor, it's Jalen Harrell, it's Josiah Stewart, and it is Derek Moore. To me, I don't know that it really matters who winds up being the quote-unquote starter here. I think what is probably more important is the guys that are pinning their ears back in the fourth quarter when you need to seal a game or when the game's on the line and you need to stop. But we'll start with the edge guys first. I mean, how do you feel about this group? And I think the biggest question to me is, are they better than last year's group?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, I thought Mike Morris was pretty darn good last year. And he if he was a little bit healthier at the end of last season, I think they would have had a better pass rush. But this is another position too where a guy could completely emerge as well. We were not talking about David Ojabo, for example, 2 years ago heading in to fall camp, but then he emerges as a guy who played about over half the snaps, ends up with double-digit sacks, and you're talking all about Ojabo, after the Ohio State game. So there's a big group there. Those four are clearly on top, as Jim Harbaugh said last week, the guys that you mentioned. But who's going to emerge as the very good or elite guys that can get after the passer, that can, stop the run as well from the edge spot? I'll be watching that. I know I've been, a guy throughout the offseason that's talked a lot about how I think Michigan needs to make strides with its pass rush. That comes on the interior as well. And it's kind of the same question I have there for Chris Jenkins as I did for J.J. McCarthy. Is he going to be a first rounder? As Jim Harbaugh said to Bruce Feldman, watch him become a top 10 pick. He's an absolute freak. I don't think he needs to be a top 10 pick for Michigan to be really good at that position. But can he be a first rounder like some others are projecting? Can he be a second rounder? Can he live up to that? That's going to be important. That's also going to help out whoever takes over at nose tackle. I think that's one of the more underrated storylines of this offseason is you're losing an incredible player in Mozzie Smith, first round pick at nose. And he was so good at stopping the run for Michigan in there. Mason Graham's got to be good. Kenneth Grant has to be really good. And then the X factor at really any of those positions on the interior is Rayshawn Benny, what kind of strides that he's made. So, I just think there are a lot of names right now, and they're in a pretty good spot with that. But who's going to emerge as the guys who demand the bulk of those snaps? Harbaugh talked about rotating. Two guys will start on the edge one week, and maybe two will start on the edge the next week until they figure out who those top guys are. You want to figure out who those top guys are. You want the edge guys to be able to set up moves throughout a game, to be able to get in a rhythm. Something that I think some of these guys lacked in years past, playing behind the Mike Morrises and Aiden Hutchinson. So, to me, it's just you got a great crop of guys right there. Some guys that could break out. We're just waiting to see, which 2, 3, or 4 it's going to be.
And of all the position groups that, using that comparison to the quarterback battle from last year, I think the edge guys, this is probably the one that mostly most mirrors that situation. Just because, like I said, I don't know that there's all of these guys could flash and probably will flash in fall camp, and you really won't have much answered because it might just come down to who plays the best with when the lights are the brightest. So for me, I mean, that's fascinating. And also, if you guys are watching on YouTube, shout out to Megan for having the chart pulled up. But this is also the scholarship chart that goes from. So if you see some names that look a little bit out of order, this isn't a depth chart. It's just more like the scholarship chart, which is helpful for us as well as a visual aid here. I want to talk about that nose tackle job really quick. This is, Mazi Smith lived and breathed stopping the run. And that's something that, talked to Kenneth Grant a few times this offseason. He talked about how Mazi tried to pass that on to the younger guys, but now it's Rayshon Benny's time and it's Kenneth Grant's time. And I think Mason Graham probably plays a little bit of nose as well. We know that Chris Jenkins is for the most part. He's put some weight on. He's up to 307 when we talked to him at Big Ten Media Days. I would say he's mostly a known commodity. I think whatever you get from him more than what we know he already is going to be huge for this defensive line. I think he's probably hoping he's a little more twitched up, be a little more impactful from a pass rush perspective. But in terms of these guys that get after it and stop the run, Kenneth Grant's a freak, but he's also a sophomore. And we've seen these guys that have, played defensive line at Michigan under Jim Harbaugh. It takes a little bit of time. It took Mazi Smith 3 years. It took Chris Hinton 3 years. It seemed like Maurice Hurst, we didn't see much of him until later on in his career. So, if I had to pick a guy to be sort of the breakout between him and Rayshon Benny, I'm probably going with Benny because it seems like we've heard a lot about him behind the scenes, not just this spring, but even dating back to fall camp last year.
Yeah, he might be the most improved. I just think for Benny, it's just going to be tough positionally because I feel like he's more in the mold of a Chris Jenkins. He could probably play the nose if he needed to. And, when they go to 3 down linemen, I think he's one of your guys that you would put in there. But I just think positionally, we're going to see a Mason Graham probably get the most snaps out of those 3 between Benny, Grant, and Graham. And he's got big shoes to fill, as we said, with Mazi leaving there. I mean, he was very good as a freshman last season, but how much better is he going to be? Because it's one thing to play 20 snaps a game. It's another thing to play, 75, snaps a game. And Mazi Smith hardly came out, and he was fantastic despite being at that size, having that conditioning. So it's a whole different beast. And, I think they need a couple guys in there to raise their level of game, because it's really important to stop the run, not have to commit too many resources, and then rush the passer when it's time to do that as well.
Yeah. So any other storylines with these two position groups? I know we're running low a little. I mean, we'll stay as long as we need to, but I have a couple other groups to get to. Just anything else on your mind with the defensive linemen?
No.
Let's move on to those linebackers then.
LBs.
The LBs. Junior Colson, I think that's a guy that we have locked in there. I would assume that Mike Barrett starts the season next to him, but the depth there is maybe as good as it's ever been, at least in terms of these last 4 or 5 years. You've got you bring in Ernest Hausman, who I think is a guy that has a chance to maybe steal someone's job in camp, and that someone maybe being Michael Barrett. But Jimmy Rolder got some run last year. I know Jaden Hood is a guy that they've liked behind the scenes. Micah Pollard's a guy who's coming along. Who knows? Maybe something happens with Nigel Glover at Northwestern. I know there's a lot of interest there, but this group, it's pretty clear. Who probably starts the season there, and the increased depth and I think athleticism too is what I think has a chance to be a really big asset for this defense.
Yeah, I think there's a clear top 4 at this position as well. Junior Colson, Mike Barrett, Ernest Hausman, and Jimmy Rolder, who, from what we've heard, has been told he's going to kind of be in that mix heading into the season and fall camp. So, now I look at just how much better are these guys. I thought Junior Colson was pretty good last season, but he wasn't a great player. He was also playing hurt with not only a hand or wrist injury, but a foot injury that he got surgery on. We saw him on a scooter in the spring that he had to recover from that. He looks a lot bigger this offseason when we saw him at Wayne State. Also seeing some pictures. I mean, he is really, really thick right now. So how that's going to help him remains to be seen. Well, excited to see kind of what the next level is for Junior Colson. I asked him that in the spring. He said next level is to be an All-American. So, he's got the athleticism. He's put on some weight. So I think I'm just excited to see what the next level is for him. And then Mike Barrett, I mean, he's a guy that absolutely came on at the end of last season. He had the 2 picks against Rutgers. He has a huge game leading Michigan in tackles against Ohio State. Thought the linebackers were a little underwhelming there in the TCU game in the Fiesta Bowl. So they need to be better this season. I think that's one of the reasons why Chris Partridge is back on Michigan's staff. So, what he's going to do with that group, I think can be, I think they can make some market improvement. And then, is Ernest Hausman going to be that X factor, as you kind of talked about? Maybe in fall camp, maybe in the season, he takes over a job. I wouldn't necessarily predict that right now, but he definitely has the license and ability, as Michigan's head coach would say. And then Rolder, I think Jaden Hood took a step in the spring. I think Micah Pollard, he really impressed last year during fall camp. Was a little bit, undersized and probably added some weight at this point. So they got a lot of depth there now. That was not one of their more deep positions last year, and now it is. So, what can Chris Partridge do with this group?
I think it's important to note with Hausman too is that, yes, he transfers in and he's got that starting experience. So people go, oh my gosh, wow, a plug and play starter at linebacker. He's got the starts in the Big Ten. But I think it's important to remember that, choose my words carefully here. I think he was drinking from the fire hose last year, kind of being thrown into action for that Nebraska team in the dwindling days of the Scott Frost era. I think that he's a guy that I think Michigan, the fact that they brought him in as a true sophomore, I think, speaks to the fact that this isn't, Drake Nugent is a plug and play guy. James Turner at kicker, we'll talk about them in a little bit, a plug and play guy. You've got these guys at, every position that it feels like they brought someone in. I think that they're willing to they're willing to play the long game with Hausman a little bit. And I think at some point, yes, I think we saw it in the spring. I mean, this defense needs guys to be a little more disruptive, a little more athletic, sideline to sideline. And that's, I'm not comparing him to Devin Bush, but I think he's a guy, maybe the closest thing athletically that they've had to that in a while. And I think that this defense needs that. And for him, I mean, it's almost, it's a clean slate. It's a fresh start. Clock almost kind of goes back to 0 for him, but he does have that experience. He's already played a really good game in the Big House in his career, playing with the Huskers last year. But for me, I think that they're willing to kind of put him on ice just a little bit. Now, if he goes out and steals a job, I mean, that's great. But again, I could see this being where maybe he just kind of works in and it's later in the year or maybe even 2024 where he winds up making his biggest impact. But you see it. I mean, the athleticism, the disruption, it was on display the second that we saw him on the field in that spring game. And I guess one last note on Junior Colson as well. I saw him out in the, I forget if it was at a camp or somewhere in Ann Arbor over the summer. And I mean, he looks like one of those edge guys that we just talked about. I mean, he is rocked up. And he's always physically looked the part, but he looks the part of a junior Big Ten linebacker now. And them having a little more depth to kind of take a little bit off of his plate, I think is going to be huge for not just the linebacker group, but also that back seven in general. And that brings us to the secondary now. And I think we'll start with safeties because I don't think there's a whole lot to discuss there. Rod Moore is going to start at one spot. Makari Page is going to start at the other. And in those 3 safety looks, now that RJ Moten's out, I think you're probably looking at Zeke Berry being that third guy. But any quick thoughts on the safeties, or am I missing something when I say that it looks pretty cut and dry there?
No, I mean, you got a guy in Rod Moore who I think can be one of the bigger breakout stars in all of college football this season. Led Michigan in interceptions last year. I mean, has always been good as a tackler, and he looks way bigger as well. He was telling me, that I think he's close to 190 at this point. There was a picture of him. He switched to jersey number 9, and just he almost looked like an edge guy. I think someone replied to my tweet with the photo of him last week, saying he could play edge rusher for Michigan. Obviously not that big, but man, he's rocked up as well. And he's always been that guy that was able to hang, in the run game. and is just a great form tackler and has great instincts. But now that he's got a little bit more pop to him, I think that is going to help Michigan as he moves around the defensive backfield. Quentin Johnson is another name I think that would be right there for that kind of third safety. So they got a little bit of depth there. There's a reason why RJ Moten transferred. I think he saw the writing on the wall. But yeah, I think it's storylines galore over at corner and nickel, which is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, I'd say don't sleep on Keon Saab. That would be the one thing I would add. I think you're going to see him mix in a little bit more as well. Kind of reminds me of a slightly more athletic Brad Hawkins, just like knowing the little bit that we did about him coming out of high school. Didn't see a ton of him last year, but I think he's more kind of that box safety. Whereas
both Jersey guys. Yeah,
that's right. Whereas Zeke Berry, I think, is a guy that, again, we'll talk. His name is going to come up when we talk nickel here in a few minutes. But yeah, I like that it goes hand in hand with the corners, but it feels like they have a really nice combination of depth and versatility here. I think they can mix and match really well with the corners and safeties and the guys that play the nickel. But let's talk about probably the biggest storyline on this team in the here and now, and that is that cornerback position. Will Johnson is, five-star guy, comes in last year, and honestly, it was kind of like the dimmer switch with him. He starts out just mixing in, and by the end of the year, I thought he was probably Michigan's best corner. Maybe not number one with a bullet, but I thought he was their best cornerback when last season ended. I think the hype was legitimate and justified with him. He's got the length. He's got the athleticism. He's played, he played a little bit of wide receiver in high school. So he's got that ball hawk and playmaking ability and that the license and the ability, so to speak, to rephrase the Jim Harbaugh quote. But that number 2 job right now, again, we talk about concerns or is it a concern or is it a question mark? Right now, I'd say it's a question mark who starts on the other side of him. I think they have guys that if the development comes along, if Steve Klingscale, has is able to unlock something, they have a really, again, talk about the combination of athleticism, all the skills you need to play that position. Amorian Walker, if he can be a little, develop a little more contact courage and also the ability to put the bad plays behind him, because that's what puts you a cut above at that position. You're going to get burned at some point, especially, if you play the Ohio State Buckeyes, like they're going to get you. Like it happens to everyone. It's the ability to compartmentalize the mistakes, put them in the past and move forward. I think for me with Amorian Walker, that's the biggest thing with him. It's clear that all of the athletic traits are there, but that might be one that takes a little bit of time. And, Jim Harbaugh considers him a starter, but it's more, again, there's about 40 guys on this team that he thinks are starting caliber. And when we saw Amorian Walker in the spring, it was not pretty. He got cooked by Peyton O'Leary, who we didn't really talk about him much at wide receiver, but that's a guy that could crack the rotation there, but still maybe your number 4 receiver, all things considered. So there's a lot of work that's needed there. Josh Wallace comes in from UMass. He's going to fit right into that battle. I wouldn't be surprised if he's the one that winds up winning it. Jaden McBurrows is that third guy. I thought we'd hear a little more about Miles Pollard, and maybe we will throughout fall camp, but those are kind of the 3 guys in the mix for this job heading into fall camp. And again, Clayton, I don't know if you agree or disagree, whatever it is. To me, this is number 1 in terms of biggest question marks on this team.
Yeah, I would still, to me, it's a couple rungs down the list. I would say pass rush on defense, but for me, looking at the corners, like I want to know how healthy Will Johnson's going to be, when he's going to be fully healthy as well. He has said that he may not play that much the first couple games. I don't know what exactly that means. I think it's quite clear at this point that maybe the minor knee scope that he told us about was a little bit more than minor, and also not quite sure if there is such a thing as a minor knee scope. Now, I think he's going to be fully healthy at some point, and that'll be big for Michigan. And maybe if he plays less or doesn't play at all in the first couple games, that'll give some of those guys competing for the other job some more snaps and the more opportunity to earn that job. But also, you got to factor in Mike Sainristil still. He said he's going to play on the outside as well. And does that mean they feel good about Jaden McBurrows maybe, as the slot corner a little, good enough to take one of the most important positions on this team and move him outside? I don't love the idea of Mike Sainristil still being 2 years into being a defensive back and at his size on the outside. But, you got to do what's best for the team. And if another guy doesn't emerge out there, then you may have to do that. So I'll just be watching how they piece this together. Guys cross-train under Steve Clinkscale at all sorts of different positions back there. So, they're going to be ready for whatever they need to do. But, yeah, it's when's Will Johnson going to be healthy, and how does Steve Clinkscale, who's also going to develop these guys throughout fall camp, they're all going to, become better players over the next month. But how does he kind of piece together nickel, corner, and whether that's a combination based on situation as well, how that develops throughout the season. But there's definitely a lot to watch back there, at those two positions.
Yeah, if there's any doubt that Will Johnson is not 100% when the season starts, I mean, put him on ice until he is needed, or until he's ready to truly play and be as close to 100% as he can. He is the type of guy where if he is healthy and he is playing as well as we think he can, because there is so much more growth that he can do as well. They use the term take away half the field, but really what he does is, if you have one guy locked down, if it's just a one-on-one matchup, I mean, just think of it from this perspective. I mean, you want him healthy when you play Marvin Harrison Jr. on that last Saturday in November. But he's the type of guy that just takes so much pressure off of the back end of that defense. And that's why, I'm not worried about, if he's healthy, whoever's that number 2 cornerback, Will Johnson is going to take so much pressure off of that guy or off of that secondary in general, to where if you need to scheme something up to kind of offset what might be a weakness or a guy that's not quite ready yet, I have confidence that they'll be able to do that. But I also think there's a really quality number 2 cornerback here somewhere. Josh Wallace has played a lot of football. Jaden McBurrows hasn't been healthy, but he is someone who I feel like we've been talking to guys for a couple of years, after practice, before practice, and you ask some of these wide receivers who their most difficult cover on the team is. Jaden McBurrows will come up and hit you, and he will give you, when he's healthy, he's giving these guys a lot of fits behind the scenes. And, I like when your corners are able to come up and tackle too. Saw him make a nice hit in the spring game. And again, it's one play, but again, if we're planting flags here on July 31st on who starts 33 days from now, I like Jaden McBurrows a lot, but Josh Wallace came here for a chance to play. He came here because he felt he could probably slide in and play right away. And at worst, I think that you have a guy that will give you some really quality depth there. But I don't think things are as dire as they look here. It's just a matter of finding out who that guy is going to be.
Yeah, I agree. I got Josh Wallace, Will Johnson if he's healthy, and then Mike Sainer still as the nickel. I think that's probably what it's going to be to start the year. Again, the big question mark there being Will Johnson's health, but there are some options there that they have to work with at corner. It's just a matter of who plays the best over the next month. And then once they're in those game situations, if a guy's getting burned against, some of these teams early in the year, like against Bowling Green, you probably have a couple other capable players you could put in, and we could see that too. But I think they got enough options here.
Let's move to special teams really quick, and then probably, sorry for the question, people. I think we'll probably wrap up after special teams.
We can rapid fire them. We got some good ones.
We can rapid fire. We have a few, but we won't keep you guys super long after we get through special teams. But, kicker, James Turner was brought in from Louisville to kind of be that guy. I would have him in front right now. Adam Samaha is just going to be getting his kicks, no pun intended, in as fall camp starts. So he's going to be in that mix as well. Tommy Doman, I think Michigan wants him to solely focus on the punting duties. To me, the biggest question with this special teams group is those return jobs and who winds up taking care of those. AJ Henning, I thought, did a fine job, but he is no longer with the program. So, Clayton, any thoughts on who we could see at these two returner jobs?
Yeah, I'm intrigued about Roman Wilson again, probably hanging on to the kick returner job and then maybe being the punt returner. I think you could see a guy like Iman Dennis or Tyler Morris, maybe even Donovan Edwards at punt returner. But that's kind of a wide open one. I think that's probably the most wide open position on the entire team heading into fall camp. So a lot of options, just need to see who emerges. But kicker, I feel good about James Turner. I mean, he could be one of the top kickers in the Big Ten, maybe the country this season. I was looking at his stats again today. I mean, he's only missed, I think, 1 or 2 extra points in his career, but he's 32 for 33 from inside 40 yards. That's huge to be able to, feel good about your kicker inside 40. He's made 14 kicks of 40 plus. Jake Moody set Michigan's program record in his career in 4 more games than James Turner with 17 kicks of 40 plus. So he's right there after 4 seasons at Louisville. It's going to be different, and Michigan may ask him to do more. And Michigan, Jim Harbaugh loves his kickers and leans on them a lot. But I think James Turner can be pretty good there. So I'm excited to see how they feel about him coming out of camp. And then you don't really know when it comes to kicker until, the lights are on. And then Tommy Doman, Jim Harbaugh said he could be a special talent at punter. So I think that's going to be an upgrade, frankly, from what Brad Robbins was last year. So I feel a lot better about Michigan special teams than I did when it was in the spring and Tommy Doman was doing just about everything. Maybe he was probably even holding for his own field goals at that point. But the James Turner edition was big, and I think Michigan has more than enough here at special teams. And William Wagner was named to the Long Snapper of the Year award watch list. I don't know what it's called, but he is should be back healthy and ready to go as well after suffering a knee injury at Iowa last year.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with the special teams right now is the fact that you've had Jake Moody and Brad Robbins basically running their own practices for the last few years. And, Tommy Doman has kind of been in both of their hip pockets. So it's weird to think that we haven't really seen him on the field, but I think he's by far kind of the elder statesman in that room, at least in terms of knowing how Jay Harbaugh does business, knowing the charting of the kicks and the things they do to keep those guys fresh and get their work in. So I'm not really worried about it. It's just, man, I mean, when you lose a kicker that winds up being a 3rd-round pick, I mean, the crazy thing about that is it probably wasn't even a reach for a team like the 49ers who, you could just be a kick away from being in the Super Bowl or what have you. But we'll see what happens. Those guys were cut from a different cloth, the way they work together. And it's not a question mark, but it's something that, when you have 2 guys that are there for 5 years and 6 years respectively, there's naturally going to be some, I don't know if growing pains is the word, but it's going to be a little bit different. So especially when we don't get to talk to them, whenever it is in press conference settings. But that pretty much covers the roster. We'll take a couple questions here. Clayton, is there any that stick out to you? I'm not seeing them on my end for some reason.
I got you. Feld for Life chimes in with another. Who's faster and can best stretch the field, Darius Clemens or Peyton O'Leary? I'd go easily Darius Clemens. O'Leary might be a little quicker. I feel like those were the routes he got open with in the spring game were more with his quickness and route running. But Darius Clemens, he's got the speed and he's huge. He's got the size, especially in the upper body for a wide receiver. You don't see that much. So I got Darius Clemens as faster than Peyton O'Leary pretty comfortably, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the other thing too is I'll say this about Peyton O'Leary is that I think he's a lot more sudden than he is fast, if that makes sense. I mean, whether a guy is green or not, like Emorian Walker at cornerback, that you can shake a guy that has the athletic profile that he does as badly at times that O'Leary did. I mean, I think that it looks to me like he's a college caliber wide receiver. Now, maybe he's just your red zone target. You throw a fade up to him or something like that. But Clemens is probably, by far, probably clearly that guy. But there's a little shake and bake to Mr. O'Leary's game as well. And I'm going to be fascinated in seeing where he winds up by the end of camp. This one is from David Chapman. I'm seeing it now. The program is in great shape. The only concern is the lack of depth at cornerback, specifically high-end and quality players. Right now, there's only Will Johnson. I don't get why we can't recruit well there. Yeah, I mean, they've missed on some guys there. I think the other thing, too, is that, at one point, DJ Turner was a 3-star guy, and Jamon Green was a guy that I think it was a high 3, low 4, whatever it was. Michigan finds a way to develop these guys. They have the last few years when there have been question marks about them, and sometimes that means a baptism by fire. Maybe we see that early on this season. But I think that one thing I can confidently say about this cornerback group is that they will be much improved by season's end because they will have those game reps. And, that's not really a hot take to say that, but I like the potential of what this group could be. We just haven't seen it yet.
I'd agree with David Chapman. I mean, the three positions that I've been thinking about that Michigan needs to recruit better at are corner, defensive tackle, and wide receiver, especially wide receiver too. But corner, they don't have one this cycle yet, so that's going to be important. That also kind of plays into H-Boy's. He says he's tired of all the 3 stars. How are we getting out recruited by Tennessee? Lost Bennett Warren, another top 150 guy. That's Bennett Warren, offensive tackle who committed to Tennessee. I would remind people that Michigan has 65% of Michigan's 2024 recruits are 4 or 5 stars, all 4 stars. That's a pretty high blue chip ratio there. So Michigan is still recruiting well overall, but there are a few positions that are lagging behind that I think Michigan needs to improve. And by the way, too, those are the positions that are probably the hardest for a team in the Midwest to recruit: wide receiver, corner, and especially D tackle. They missed out on some guys, Aaron Scott yesterday at corner and all that, but they need to do a little bit better there. I would agree with that, but I would also remind people that overall this class is not a bunch of 3 stars. It's mostly guys that are higher than 3-star.
Yeah. It's going to take some time. Still kind of figuring out NIL, still kind of reestablishing yourself as a national power. I know Michigan has kind of always recruited itself to a certain extent, but you got to keep winning. You got to keep putting guys in the league. And I think that's the key to all this. And again, it's tough to pull. I mean, a lot of that talent, the skilled talent, it's from the South, it's from the state of Texas. And it has a hard, like just calling it what it is. It has a hard time making it past the state of Ohio sometimes, because that's the way it's been. You trust Michigan's player development, but after this year, it's going to be fascinating to see how they kind of keep this thing rolling, because I also think it's taken some special guys to turn the ship around. So I don't know, Clayton, any other thoughts before we get out of here?
I don't think so. Fantastic show. Thanks everybody for the questions. Yeah,
I know. I feel like I just ran a marathon. It's a little bit longer, but hey, fall camp is here. Wanted to make sure we covered a lot of ground. We'll see what happens in terms of. I don't know that we'll speak to any players this week. Probably looking at early next week for something like that. But for sure, keep it locked in over at the Wolverine for updates from behind closed doors at Schembechler Hall. On the recruiting trail, we've got some fall camp preview stuff rolling out, or I should say maybe more fall camp kickoff stuff rolling out this week. So be sure to like and subscribe to this video. Subscribe to all of our content over at thewolverine.com. Again, thank you to our sponsors today for their continued support of our show. Clayton and I will be back Thursday with you guys. Chris Ballas enjoying a much-deserved and much-needed vacation this week, so we'll be holding down the fort both with this show and Thursday night show. So appreciate you guys for tuning in. I appreciate our producer Megan behind the scenes. We will talk to you soon. Thanks for listening.